A scratch of paper, a $200 debt, and a neighborhood that smiles with clenched teeth. When the letters turned red, I learned how quickly a home becomes a bargaining chip. They called it dues. I called it oxygen. And someone in a black robe would decide who gets to breathe. On a Tuesday that smelled like cut grass and rain, the envelope with the little window arrived. It was innocent by design, the kind of olive gray paper that pretends it's coming from someone reasonable. I tore it, open with my thumbnail because I was making dinner and stubborn, and because bad news deserves impatience. Inside, a threat stood on stiff cardstock. Notice of intent to foreclose. For $200. I reread the line until the words unhooked from meaning. A pot boiled over behind me. The letter said I had 15 days before the board escalated. Collection efforts again. The house was a small yellow square with a porch swing, bought with good intentions and an optimistic budget. The HOA brochures had promised a fountain, a gated calm, and neighbors who picked up after their dogs. I'd believed them. I'd believed in fresh mulch and order. $200 was a week of groceries and the gas it took me to commute to the clinic. I'd missed the quarterly dues while juggling overtime for a patient who coded twice. I meant to send it. I meant to breathe. Late fees and interest had inflated a pebble into a boulder. The next day, a sign appeared at the entrance, bright as a smile. Community standards keep us safe. Below it, a man in a polo shirt wound a hose around his wrist and winked at me like we shared a joke. We didn't. Our HOA president, Sylvia Brooke, lived 3 houses down. Her shutters were lacquered into mirror perfection, and the crates on her porch displayed seasonal corn stalks like flags. I took the letter to her anyway. She read it while a cinnamon candle burned on the hall table. Her expression softened, then cooled. Policies, she said as apology. She referred me to management, the capital M pronounced with reverence. Their office sat above a dry cleaner on Maple, a suite with carpet that smelled like steam and lemon. A man named Dwyer greeted me with a handshake designed to dominate. He explained I could pay the $200 plus fees, plus attorney costs, accrued in anticipation of litigation. My cheeks got hot. Litigation, I repeated, tasting metal. He smiled at the copy machine. We prefer compliance. He slid a new printout toward me, numbers fattened like geese. At the bottom, a line announced a lien had been filed already. At night, the sound of the refrigerator became a metronome measuring my worry. The porch swing dipped as if someone sat beside me, though it was only wind. My daughter, Lila, slept with one palm open against the wall, practicing trust. The house held our laughter in hairline cracks by the baseboards, our arguments in the dents on the pantry door. It had taken me 4 years to paint it the color of butter. The letter made every nail provisional, every picture frame tenant. I folded it again and again until the paper remembered my hands more than their threat. My neighbor Gus, a widower with orchids and a cough, leaned over the fence with a beer and said, "They did it to a guy on Pine. Lost his place over garbage. Cans." He shook his head, blossoms trembling. "200's ridiculous, kid." The next morning brought certified mail. The envelope wore green like a bruise. Inside, new math. 200, plus late fees, plus interest, plus legal charges. Now, totaling almost 800. A hearing date flickered near the bottom like a dare. I opened my laptop and searched the law until my eyes gritted. There were thresholds, protections. Not for us, Dwyer's letter implied. Our covenants, he said, allowed non-judicial foreclosure for unpaid assessments, and they had referred the matter to counsel. My hand shook. I called legal aid. A woman named Marisol answered with a voice like warm bread. She asked me questions while her keyboard clicked a rhythm I could live by. State statute requires 12 months of non-payment, or at least $1,200, she said. They're inflating with costs to vault the line. I pictured a pole vaulter clearing a bar with my roof under them. She took my case. I exhaled, dizzy, grateful. The board met in the clubhouse under anemic fluorescence that hummed like gnats. Rows of beige chairs faced a folding table where Sylvia arranged her agenda packets into perfect fans. Dwyer sat at the end with a stack of violations like trading cards. When it was time for public comment, I stood. My knees knocked. I explained the mistake, the payment I'd brought, the law. Sylvia smiled without her eyes. "We have procedures," she said. Dwyer leaned into the microphone as if it were a friend. "We're protecting the community," he said. Behind me, someone clapped. Someone else hissed softly. That night, an orange tag fluttered from my doorknob like a burning leaf. It announced a hearing before the magistrate and warned of additional costs if I did not appear. Gus offered to lend me the money. "Pride's expensive," he wheezed. I watched Lila color in a picture of our porch with a pink crayon and wondered what lessons I was teaching. I'd brought a check. They'd refused, it preferring escalation. I signed my name under a declaration of facts for Marisol. My handwriting looked like a stranger's. Fear tightened its fingers around my throat and squeezed carefully that night. The morning the court notice named a judge, I traced his name with my finger as if it held a secret map. Honorable Kamal Reyes. It sounded like someone who listened before he spoke. I gathered pay stubs, emails, the rejected check, and tucked them into a blue folder that matched the sky. On the porch, the fountain at the neighborhood entrance hissed awake. A girl on a scooter passed, laughing. My phone vibrated with an unknown number. "Ms. Santos," a voice said. "We can settle if you agree to attorney's fees." Somewhere, a gavel waited. I opened my mouth. They wanted a signature on an apology written in dollars. I wanted a roof that didn't tremble when the mail came. Between phone rings and printer whirs, a different neighborhood appeared, one that bartered shame. If justice is blind, I prayed, it could at least hear refusal. And mine was loud. "Put it in writing," I told the voice on the phone. He paused, surprised, like I'd reversed a current. "As you wish," he said, and the line clicked with a politeness sharpened to a blade. Minutes later, an email slid into my inbox. Settlement terms that wore civility like perfume. Pay the assessment, yes, but pay the attorney's fees too. And pay them now, with interest still ticking like a bomb. I forwarded it to Marisol and stared at the blinking cursor as if it could blink the whole thing away. Marisol called me back in under 10 minutes. "Don't sign," she said. Math is a ladder to a roof they're not allowed to climb." I could hear other phones ringing behind her, other fires. "Will file to enjoin the foreclosure, also request their full ledger and collection policy. You're entitled to it." Entitled. The word felt like a coat I was allowed to put on and didn't have to apologize for wearing. I printed the email and slid it into my blue folder, along with the rejected check and my shaky declaration. In the kitchen, Lila stood on a chair stirring pancake batter, her hair in 2 uneven pigtails, her face serious as a surgeon. "Mama," she said, "are we making circle pancakes or heart pancakes?" A choice I could actually answer. "Hearts," I said, and kissed her flour-dusted nose. We ate in the porch light while the fountain at the entrance whispered its perpetual shh, as if calming the very panic it helped create. Gus shuffled up the walk before 9 with a manila envelope and a cough that wouldn't quit him. "Brought you something," he said, and set the envelope on my table like contraband. Inside were old newsletters and minutes from long-forgotten board meetings. He'd kept them the way some people keep recipe cards, evidence of what sustains us. "Read August 2 years ago," he said, tapping a page. "They bragged about cutting delinquency by firm enforcement. That's when they hired management." His mouth twisted around the word, like it tasted off. "They scared folks into paying things they didn't owe." I went to the management office on Maple to request my documents. The receptionist said one moment in a tone that measured exactly how long I would be kept waiting. I stood near the printer and watched papers flip out in warm, pale stacks. When they finally handed me a packet, the paper still smelled like ink. I flipped through the ledger, heart accelerating like a runner on the downhill. There it was. Oh, line item in Dwyer's lean handwriting. Owner attempted to pay assessments only. Advised payment cannot be accepted without legal fees. Refer to counsel. $600 estimated attorney fee added to ledger. I read it twice, my thumb leaving a clean stripe. On the edge of the page, the ledger didn't make the refusal an accident. It made it a policy, a strategy, a fulcrum they used to pry open a door. The receptionist smiled at me without revealing any teeth. I smiled back in my best imitation of neighborly. My hands were vibrating. I paid the 30 cents they charge per page because nothing in this world is free, especially paper that can topple a house. Marisol's eyebrows lifted when I showed her the entry. "Good," she said softly, as if we'd found water in a desert. "We'll include this with the motion." She typed fast, the legal text blooming on her screen like ivy. "They can't reject payment to manufacture the threshold, not here. The statute doesn't let their fees drag you across the finish line." My heart, a trapped bird, beat against my ribs, then rested against the bars. I could breathe slower for 3 minutes. That was something. That was a life raft. That night I wrote a letter to the board that I would never send. It began with "Dear neighbors" and ended with all the things I wished for our street. Chalk drawings that lasted longer than threats, toddlers on tricycles who learned about kindness before enforcement, porch lights that meant welcome. In the middle I wrote, "I tried to pay you. You chose a fight." I pressed the pen too hard and the words ghosted onto the page below. Lila found me at the dining table and slid a drawing into my lap. Our house with a tree underneath it, its roots, thick and deep, wrapping around the foundation like hands in prayer. At work I hovered over my patients and charted meticulously, as if perfect notes could insulate me from chaos at home. Sometimes I imagined my house as a person on a gurney, beeping just a touch too fast, its blood pressure creeping up. "We're going to get you stable," I whispered to no one in particular, to the drawer of socks that never matched, to the butter yellow walls with their careful brushstrokes, to the swing that still swayed in the invisible traffic of our days. The day of the hearing, the sky was the clear blue of an answer whispered in church. Gus offered to watch Lila. "We'll water the orchids and say bad words quietly," he said. I wore my one good dress and the heels that made me walk like a person with a plan. The courthouse smelled like sanitizer and, faintly, paper. A bailiff with a kind face took my name. "You'll be in 3C, he said, pointing. People hunched, on the wooden benches, clutching folders, holding their own narratives together with binder clips and hope. Marisol met me in the corridor with a nod that steadied my bones. "Remember," she said as we stood outside the door, "you're not a delinquent. You're a person who paid. They refused. That matters." Dwyer swept past us carrying a leather folder that flaunted its own importance. Sylvia trailed him, lips pressed into a pale line, hair brilliant in the fluorescent light. Their attorney was a man with perfect cuffs and an expression like a white tablecloth. He gave us a look that said we were the mess on it. Inside, the courtroom was bright and colder than it needed to be. Honorable Kamal Reyes sat on the bench, his gaze moving like a slow hand over the room. He called the docket with quiet authority, his voice a metronome set to reasonable. By the time he said my name, my heartbeat had synced to it. "Santos versus Brook Estates Homeowners Association," the clerk announced. The words looked too big in the air, like a giant one of those lawn inflatables that will collapse at night, and then surprise you again with each sunrise. Marisol began. "Your Honor, the association initiated foreclosure over a $200 assessment. They chose not to accept tender of the assessment, instead adding preemptive attorney's fees to push the ledger over the threshold contemplated by statute. We seek an injunction and costs." She kept it clean. She kept it human without bleeding into melodrama. When she slid the ledger forward, the judge accepted it without looking at counsel first, and I saw in that small motion some tug of gravity shifting. The HOA's attorney rose and arranged his face into unctuous concern. "We are simply enforcing covenants, Your Honor. The community relies on assessments to function. The owner has refused to bring her account current." He put a sheaf of documents on the podium like a wall he could hide behind. "Our policies are uniform and necessary." Reyes's eyes didn't blink for a long moment. "Uniform," he repeated, considering the shape of the word. "Ms. Santos attempted to pay the principal assessment?" His gaze shifted to Marisol, then to me. My throat went dry. Yes, I said. With a check they refused. My voice sounded like a violin that had spent too long in a closet. The judge nodded once, and the tilt of his head felt like acknowledgement, like being introduced to an adult who actually sees you. Dwyer couldn't resist the microphone. It's important to understand, he said, leaning forward, that when owners fall behind, costs accrue. We can't be expected to float chronic non-payment. His hands made a gentle steeple, his nails perfect. Somewhere, a pen clicked, then clicked again. Sylvia stared at the back wall, listening like a person awaiting a weather report. Marisol didn't raise her voice. She let the ledger speak. Exhibit B, she said, and the clerk slid another document up to the bench. The entry glared from the page. Owner attempted to pay assessments only. Advised payment cannot be accepted without legal fees. Refer to counsel. $600 estimated attorney fee added to ledger. The judge's eyebrows drew together, not dramatically, not for show, just enough to make the room feel closer. Mr. Dwyer, he said finally. Approach. He said it without cruelty. Even his invitation carried measured weight. Dwyer glanced at Sylvia, then at their attorney, as if seeking some absolution that would make his legs continue. He stepped forward. I could see the faint shine of sweat at his temple. The air in my chest turned thin, high-altitude air. Lila's drawing folded small in my purse, the roots creasing with each breath. The judge turned the ledger toward him. Explain this entry, he said. His finger tapped the sentence, not hard, just enough. The tap echoed in my blood. Dwyer opened his mouth, then closed it, then forced words out like pushing a piece of furniture over a rug. Our policy is to require the full balance to be paid, including reasonable fees, he said. Otherwise, Your Honor, we encourage gamesmanship. Gamesmanship, Reyes said, tasting the word with a trace of sadness that was almost tenderness. Or leverage. The room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the light above us, the whisper of fabric when Sylvia exhaled too fast. Somewhere down the hall, a door thudded. It sounded like a heartbeat. The judge sat back, eyes on Dwyer, then on me. He picked up his pen. He looked at Marisol. Ms. Santos, he said, when you attempted to pay the principal, what happened exactly? I told him. The exact date, the check, the way the receptionist held it gingerly as if it were something living that might bite. The call from counsel, the offer dressed as mercy. He listened. He actually listened. His pen didn't move. His face didn't betray triumph or moralizing glee, just attention, the rarest currency. When I was done, the room exhaled. He looked down at the ledger again. Then he looked back up, straight into the center of me, and said, very gently, all right. He closed the file, but not tightly. He folded his hands. The gavel rested by his right hand like a quiet animal. Counsel, he said to the HOA's attorney, I have questions for you about the statute and your association's practices. He paused. The pause stretched, a wire humming between two buildings. He lifted the ledger once more, then set it down carefully, as if returning a borrowed thing. Let's talk about thresholds. Thresholds are supposed to be doorways, not cliffs. When the judge leaned forward, the room leaned with him. I measured each breath as if I could purchase seconds. If a gavel is simply wood, why did it sound like thunder in my bones when he raised his hand that day? Let's talk about thresholds, Judge Reyes said, and the word stopped fluttering and began to mean something. He angled the ledger toward himself again, then looked at the HOA's attorney. The statute your counsel cites references foreclosure for 12 months of unpaid assessments or no less than $1,200. Show me where it contemplates preemptive attorney's fees ballooning a trivial debt. The attorney cleared his throat. His cuffs didn't look as crisp up close. Your Honor, the law permits recovery of reasonable costs of collection and recovery, Reyes repeated, after a debt exists, not as a means of creating the condition you desire. He slid his glasses down a fraction. The remedy of foreclosure is severe. Equity abhors a forfeiture, particularly where a homeowner has tendered the principal. Do you dispute that tender was made? A beat. 2. The hum of lights gathered in the ceiling like a swarm. The attorney glanced at Dwyer, who smiled the way. You smile when you don't know whether the joke is over. We do not dispute that Ms. Santos attempted to pay the assessment, the attorney said at last. But our policy requires, the court is not obliged to enforce your policy, Reyes said without heat. Only the law. Something loosened in the room, a knot releasing. Marisol didn't smile. She held her posture like a bridge. I stared at the wood grain of the council table and saw imaginary roads running through it, the stubborn paths trees make even after being cut down. Furthermore, the judge continued, your ledger reflects that you refused payment, and then added an estimated attorney's fee. Estimated. He tasted the word, let it dissolve. You did not pay this fee. You merely invoked it like a spell. The corner of his mouth tilted, not in humor but in recognition that language could be an instrument as blunt as a brick. Sylvia's face did an odd thing. It didn't crumble. She was not a crumbling person. But it flickered, a candle inside a hurricane glass finding a seam in the wind. Dwyer looked at his perfect nails. I am granting the injunction, Reyes said then, as if he were announcing something ordinary, like Tuesday. The association is enjoined from proceeding with foreclosure. The plaintiff has demonstrated a likelihood of success on the merits and irreparable harm. The court further orders the association to accept tender of principal assessments without conditioning acceptance on preemptive legal fees. The attorney began to protest. But, Your Honor, Reyes lifted a hand. He didn't slam anything. He simply let the air quiet. You may pursue reasonable fees by appropriate motion, post-acceptance if at all. You may not manufacture the foreclosure threshold by refusing principal. That would make the statutory safeguard meaningless. There was a sound in me like ice breaking on a river. Marisol's hand, light as a moth, brushed my sleeve, then withdrew. We also ask that the court award fees to the plaintiff, she said, given the necessity of counsel to prevent an unlawful foreclosure and the association's bad faith. Bad faith hung there, a small brave flag. The judge considered it. I am reserving the question of fees, he said, but I am strongly inclined. Your client should not have had to hire counsel to stop a train your association chose to start. Sylvia shifted in her seat, the stiffness of her shoulders cracking marginally. Dwyer studied the document as if reading it would send it back in time. I thought of Lila's pink crayon porch, the roots of our house wrapped like a rosary, and pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth to keep from sobbing into the quiet that had, for the first time in weeks, chosen to be kind. Mr. Dwyer, the judge added softer. That softness was scarier than anger. You used the word gamesmanship earlier to describe a homeowner who tried to pay a $200 assessment. Words matter. Neighbors matter. So do the limits of your power. His words didn't sting. They sank. They found ground. He picked up the gavel then, not with theatrics, but with the tenderness of someone setting down a sleeping child. The tap he gave the bench was lighter than I expected. It traveled through me anyway like a tuning fork finding the note I'd been trying, for months, to hit. When we filed out into the hall, the courthouse air felt warmer, as if it had been trapped too long behind the doors and was eager to rush us toward sunlight. The bailiff with the kind face nodded as if we'd completed a rite. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to hug everyone, including the potted ficus. Dwyer approached in a straight line that pretended it wasn't an ambush. Mrs. Santos, he began, I think we can resolve this amicably now. If you're willing to. Marisol stepped half a shoulder forward, her voice silk over steel. We'll remit the principal today. You'll correct the ledger. You'll retract the lien. And you'll put in writing that tender of principal will not be refused going forward. If not, we'll see you at the compliance hearing and talk about sanctions. He blinked. He wasn't used to other people drawing the lines. We'll confer with the board. He glanced at Sylvia. She met my eyes for a fraction of a heartbeat. There was something in her look like apology, or fatigue, or the flicker of a person who just realized that keeping shutters perfect is not the same as being right. We left the building and walked into a day so bright it looked hand-washed. On the sidewalk, a woman in a yellow coat laughed into her phone, the kind of laugh that makes strangers smile. Marisol's heels clicked like punctuation. She let out the smallest breath. "That is, to use a legal term, a very good outcome," she said, and finally allowed herself a sliver of a grin. I paid the assessment at their office that afternoon with a cashier's check. The receptionist took it without her usual ceremony, her smile less practiced or maybe just tired. The air smelled of lemon and defeat. On the wall, a framed poster declared "Community starts with you" in a font that was trying too hard. I didn't argue with it. I just wanted to go home. At Gus's, orchids nodded from their hooks like an audience that had stayed for the credits. He opened the door before I knocked twice. "Well?" he demanded, eyes bright behind cataracts of worry. "We keep the house," I said. "The judge said the law does, not out of charity." I didn't realize until then that I'd been standing, taller, that my shoulders had abandoned their hunched protective position. Gus whooped, a sound that wheezed and then found its own breath. He hugged me too hard, then pretended he hadn't. "Knew it," he said, which meant he hadn't, and had hoped anyway. That night, Lila fell asleep on the couch, one palm still, pressed to the wall as if reminding it we were here. I carried her to bed and stood in the doorway a long time, listening to her small breaths make a metronome of safety. The porch swing creaked. The fountain at the neighborhood entrance shushed. The house exhaled. The weeks after came in a different color. The lien was released. A letter arrived on paper more humble than the first, acknowledging acceptance of my payment and regret for any distress. Not an apology. Not exactly. But there was a line at the bottom I liked. "The association has adopted a policy to accept principal assessments without conditioning acceptance on costs." I pinned it to the corkboard like a moth I didn't want to forget fluttered once in my kitchen. People changed in small ways. On trash day, the guy from Maple who always left his cans out an extra day rolled mine in when I worked late. The sidewalk. Chalk drawings multiplied, suns with too many rays, hopscotch grids that ended near our mailbox. A notice went up about the next board election. "You should run," Gus said. I laughed until I realized he wasn't joking. "I don't have time to be right all the time," I said, "just some of it." Sylvia's seasonal crates updated as usual. The pumpkins immaculate, then the pine boughs. One morning she paused on the walk and handed Lila a cinnamon cookie that cracked like a secret in her hands. "Your picture of the tree is beautiful," she told me, without meeting my eyes. Then she went on her way. I didn't know what to do with that. Maybe it wasn't mine to do anything with. At the clubhouse, the fluorescent lights still hummed like gnats, but the room felt less weaponized. The minutes recorded resident concerns instead of violations. Dwyer sat more quietly, or maybe I had stopped giving his confidence the respect he wanted from it. The fountain still shushed and shushed. It was never going to shut up. That was fine. We set our own metronomes now. When the order awarding my fees came in, Reyes had kept his inclination. The check from the association was stiff with grudgingness. Marisol slid it across her desk with a well-earned smile. "Maybe buy yourself a better porch light with it," she said. I thought about it, but the old light, with its soft, weary glow, had watched us hold the line. It deserved to keep burning. Sometimes, late at night, I sat on the swing with a blanket and a mug and read the phrases in the order out loud to myself, as if they were spells. Injunction granted, irreparable harm, equity abhors, a forfeiture. The words didn't make me brave. They reminded me I already was. One Saturday, the community held a block potluck that felt like an apology and a celebration, in the way that casseroles can be both. Kids ran in figure eights. Someone brought a sheet cake that said, "Welcome home," in blue frosting, a shade too electric to be natural. I sliced it in careful squares, the knife finding the grid like a map. A new family moved into the house at the end of the cul-de-sac, a woman with a tattoo of a whale on her wrist, and a man who looked like he sang in his car. I took them a pie, and a small, well-folded page. The name of the statute, Marisol's number, the moral disguised as a resource. Just in case, I said. The woman touched the whale with her thumb. Just in case, she agreed. We nodded at each other, strangers and not. On a night when the wind made the kind of sound that makes you check the windows, Lila crawled into my bed and curled under my arm. "Did the judge save our house?" she asked, sleep thickening her voice. I thought about Dwyer's smile and Sylvia's shuttered calm, about Marisol's quiet ferocity, about the way a human being's name sounded different when said with respect. "We saved it," I said. "All of us. The judge just had the final word." She liked that. She fell back asleep holding it the way children hold something new, a leaf, a button, a sentence, as if it might slip away. I watched the room in the moonlight, the familiar shapes that once had seemed like suspects now returning to their roles as furniture, as family. The next morning, the little windowed envelopes still came sometimes, but they didn't swell in. My throat like a swallowed shard. I opened what needed opening. I threw away what didn't. I picked up a pink crayon and handed it to my daughter. We went outside. On the sidewalk, we drew our house again, roots thick and benevolent, stretching under everything. We drew the judge's gavel as a small brown bird, perched on the roofline quiet and watchful. When the fountain shushed, I shushed back just to hear myself answer. And in the answering, the neighborhood learned a new word. Hello.